The massive space station Nexus 7 hummed with the collective voices of 100 different species, their conversations creating a symphony of alien languages that echoed through the crystalline corridors. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his ornate ceremonial robes as he strode toward the diplomatic wing, his forearms gesticulating wildly as he spoke to his aide. "Another human representative," he clicked dismissively, his mandibles producing the characteristic sound of annoyance that his species was known for. As if the previous failures weren't embarrassing enough for their pathetic little world. The aide, a younger Zephyrian named Veltar, scuttled alongside his superior on 6 legs. "This one appears different, Ambassador. The dossier shows minimal background information, and he requested no ceremonial greeting." Kethvar's compound eyes gleamed with amusement. How perfectly human. No doubt another of their amateur diplomats who thinks silence equals wisdom. They send children to play in the arena of galactic politics. In the shadows of a nearby alcove, Thexmor, a towering Brutarian war chief, overheard the conversation. His scaled hide rippled with what passed for laughter among his kind. Standing nearly 10 feet tall with muscles that could crush titanium, he had seen countless species attempt to negotiate with the Galactic Council. Humans, in his experience, were particularly amusing in their naivety. "The little pink skins think they can walk among giants," he rumbled to his lieutenant. "Remember their last representative? Stammered through every session, sweated like a melting ice cube. This new one will probably faint at the first sign of real negotiation." Meanwhile, in the observation deck overlooking the main diplomatic hall, Council Chairman Xeris floated in his biomechanical support chamber, his ancient form sustained by technology that predated most civilizations. His species, the Ethereals, had witnessed the rise and fall of empires across millennia. To him, humanity was nothing more than a curious footnote in galactic history. "The humans arrived today," he transmitted telepathically to his council members. "Their previous attempts at meaningful participation have been educational. Perhaps this time they will understand their place in the natural order." The Draknari representative, General Vosek, materialized from his cloaking field beside the chairman's chamber. His reptilian features were marked with ritual scars that told the story of 1,000 battles. "Should we prepare for another spectacle, Chairman? Their last diplomat caused quite the stir when he challenged Protocol 7 Alpha without understanding its implications." "Let them come," Xeris replied with the mental equivalent of a sigh. "It matters little. The outcome will be the same as always." Across the station, in a modest transport bay reserved for minor delegations, a single human ship docked with barely a whisper of sound. Unlike the grand vessels of major galactic powers, this craft was utilitarian, showing signs of practical use rather than ceremonial polish. The docking tube extended, and the bay fell silent as the airlock cycled. Marcus Chen stepped onto the station with no fanfare, no retinue, no display of wealth or power. He carried a simple data pad and wore the standard black uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. His appearance was unremarkable by human standards: average height, dark hair beginning to show touches of gray, and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. The docking supervisor, a multi-tentacled Aquarian named Splash of Deep Currents, barely glanced up from his manifest. "Purpose of visit?" "Diplomatic mission," Marcus replied quietly, his voice carrying no more emotion than if he were ordering coffee. "Duration?" "Until concluded." The Aquarian's tentacles twitched with mild irritation at the vague response, but he stamped the approval anyway. "Diplomatic Quarter, Section 7. Try not to cause any incidents like your predecessor." Marcus nodded once and walked away, his footsteps silent on the station's deck plating. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested either extensive training or natural predatory instinct. Behind him, the Aquarian shook his head dismissively and returned to his work, already forgetting the unremarkable human who had just passed through his checkpoint. The diplomatic quarter buzzed with preparation for the upcoming session. Representatives from dozens of species prepared their arguments, rehearsed their presentations, and engaged in the delicate dance of pre-negotiation politics. The issue at hand was significant enough to draw attention from across the galaxy. The territorial rights to the recently discovered Kepler 442 system, rich in rare elements and positioned at a strategic crossroads of major trade routes. In the Zephyrian delegation's preparation room, Ambassador Kethvar reviewed his strategy with satisfaction. The humans will undoubtedly make some emotional appeal about their exploration rights and peaceful intentions, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. We have legal precedent, superior technology, and the backing of 3 major trade federations. This will be over before their representative can finish stammering through his opening statement. The Brutarian war chief, Thexmore, was less subtle in his preparations. In the combat training facility reserved for warrior species, he was demonstrating his strength to a gathering of younger species representatives, bending metal bars and crushing stone with his bare hands. When words fail, he growled, strength prevails. The humans learned this lesson once before. Perhaps they need a reminder. Several of the observers nodded nervously, remembering humanity's previous diplomatic defeat when they had been forced to abandon their claim to the mineral-rich Tau Ceti system after a show of force from the Brutarian fleet. Unknown to all of them, Marcus Chen sat alone in his assigned quarters, reading. Not strategic reports or legal documents, but a worn paperback copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. The pages were dog-eared from countless readings, and notes filled the margins in multiple languages. His expression remained neutral as he read, but occasionally his finger would trace a particular passage, as if memorizing words that held deeper meaning. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The holographic display showed the face of Director Sarah Chen, head of Earth's diplomatic corps and, though not widely known, Marcus's sister. The session begins in 6 hours, she said without preamble. Are you ready? Define ready, Marcus replied, closing the book and setting it aside. Marcus, you know what I mean. The Council has never taken us seriously. 3 major delegations are aligned against us, and we have virtually no support. The media back home is already preparing for another diplomatic failure. Marcus stood and moved to the small viewport that looked out into space. Earth was visible as a tiny blue dot in the distance, barely distinguishable from the stars around it. Do you remember what Father used to say about hunting? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Their father had been a career military officer who had taught his children that preparation and patience were more valuable than size or strength. The loudest animal in the forest is usually the most frightened. And the most dangerous? Moves in silence until the moment to strike. Sarah paused, understanding, crossing her features. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? Nothing you don't already know. The Council respects strength, but they misunderstand what strength means. They equate volume with power, size with capability, display with substance. And you intend to teach them otherwise. Marcus turned from the viewport, and for just a moment his sister caught a glimpse of something in his eyes that reminded her why he had been chosen for this mission, despite his lack of traditional diplomatic credentials. I intend to represent humanity's interests. How that lesson is delivered depends entirely on them. The communication ended, leaving Marcus alone once again. He returned to his reading, but now his attention focused on a different book, one that few outside of certain military circles would recognize. The Predator's Manual, a classified study on psychological warfare and intimidation tactics. The cover was unmarked, and the pages showed the kind of wear that came from practical application rather than academic study. As the station's artificial day cycle began to shift toward evening, The various delegations engaged in the traditional pre-session socializing that served as both intelligence gathering and power positioning. In the grand dining hall, species clustered around tables that could accommodate their various physiologies. The conversations a mixture of diplomatic pleasantries and barely concealed threats. The Zephyrian table dominated the center of the room. Ambassador Kethvar holding court with representatives from the Helion Trade Consortium and the Crystal Hegemony. His voice carried clearly across the hall as he regaled his audience with tales of previous human diplomatic failures. "You should have seen their representative during the Vega incident," he chittered with amusement. "Turned 3 different shades of red and actually began perspiring when General Thexmore merely stood up. They withdrew their claim before we even reached the formal negotiation phase." At the Brutarian table, Thexmore was engaged in an arm wrestling match with a representative from the silicon-based rockworms, the metal table groaning under the strain of their competition. Between matches, he regaled his audience with stories of humanity's military limitations. "Their ships are adequate for their local space," he rumbled, easily defeating his opponent. "But they lack the stomach for true conflict. When faced with superior force, they retreat rather than fight. It is almost disappointing how easily they yield." Near the back of the hall, at a table reserved for minor delegations, Marcus Chen sat alone. His meal remained largely untouched, as he observed the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to studying potential threats. Several representatives from smaller worlds had approached his table during the evening, offering polite greetings and tentative inquiries about humanity's position on various issues. To each, he had provided brief, polite responses that conveyed nothing of substance while maintaining diplomatic courtesy. When asked about his strategy for the upcoming session, he had simply smiled and said, "We shall see what tomorrow brings." Now, as the evening wound down and the various delegations began to retire to prepare for the next day's session, Marcus remained at his table, apparently studying his data pad, but actually cataloging every gesture, every statement, every display of confidence or anxiety he had witnessed. His expression never changed, but behind his eyes, the mind of a predator was calculating distances, measuring strengths, and identifying weaknesses. As he finally rose to leave, several conversations paused, as representatives noticed the humans' movement. But their attention was brief and dismissive. To them, he remained what he had appeared to be all evening, quiet, unremarkable, and ultimately insignificant. They returned to their discussions, secure in their assumptions about tomorrow's proceedings. Marcus Chen walked back to his quarters through corridors that had grown quiet with the station's night cycle. His footsteps made no sound on the deck plating, and his breathing remained steady and controlled. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what the other delegations expected: another human diplomat out of his depth and facing inevitable defeat. In his quarters, he made his final preparations for the next day's session. These involved no grand speeches, no detailed legal briefs, no tactical displays or shows of force. Instead, he spent time in meditation, centering his mind and focusing his thoughts. He reviewed certain files on his data pad, but these were not the diplomatic records the other delegations would expect. They were psychological profiles, behavioral analyses, and detailed assessments of each major representative's personality, fears, and pressure points. As the station's lights dimmed to simulate night, Marcus Chen sat in perfect silence, his hands folded, his breathing slow and controlled. Tomorrow would bring the formal session where humanity's claim to the Kepler 442 system would be heard and, according to every prediction, dismissed. The other delegations slept secure in their certainty of victory, their plans made, their strategies rehearsed. They had no idea that they were about to meet not a diplomat, but a reaper who harvested victories from the overconfidence of his opponents. The silent human in the unremarkable quarters was not preparing to negotiate, he was preparing to hunt. The Grand Council chamber of Nexus 7 was a marvel of galactic engineering, designed to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of hundreds of species while maintaining an atmosphere of gravitas befitting interstellar diplomacy. The chamber's dome stretched nearly a kilometer across, with seating arranged in concentric circles that descended toward a central platform. Environmental controls created microclimates for methane breathers, silicon-based life forms, and energy beings, while translation matrices ensured that every word spoken could be understood across the vast spectrum of galactic languages. Ambassador Kethvar arrived early, as was his custom, his ceremonial robes freshly pressed and his 4 arms adorned with the jeweled symbols of his rank. He positioned himself at the Zephyrian delegation's prominent seat in the 3rd tier, where his voice would carry clearly to both the council and the recording devices. Around him, his staff arranged data crystals and holographic projectors with military precision. "Today marks another step in establishing proper galactic order," he announced to his assembled team. "The humans will present their pathetic claim, we will demonstrate its legal inadequacies, and the matter will be resolved before the midday recess. Perhaps this time they will finally understand that good intentions do not override superior resources and legitimate territorial precedents." His aide, Veltar, activated the holographic display that would present their case. Charts showing Zephyrian technological superiority, trade route analyses, and legal precedents dating back 3,000 years filled the air above their table. "The presentation is ready, Ambassador. 17 key points of law, 12 economic impact studies, and a complete analysis of human technological limitations." General Thexmore's arrival caused a stir throughout the chamber as his massive form cast shadows over nearby delegations. Standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing over half a ton of pure muscle, the Brutarian war chief was an imposing figure, even by the standards of a galaxy filled with diverse and often intimidating species. His ritual armor clanked with each step, and the ceremonial weapons at his sides served as potent reminders of his people's military might. "Let the small humans come forward," he rumbled to his lieutenant, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber despite his apparent attempt at discretion. "Today, they will learn the difference between civilization and savagery. When their words fail, as they inevitably will, perhaps a demonstration of true strength will finally teach them their place." The Brutarian delegation had prepared more than legal arguments. 3 of Thexmore's most intimidating warriors flanked the general, their presence a not-so-subtle reminder that diplomacy among warrior races often involved displays of physical dominance. The message was clear: challenge Brutarian claims at your own risk. Chairman Xeris materialized in his floating biomechanical chamber at the center of the chamber's apex, his ancient form barely visible within the life support systems that had kept him alive for over 2 millennia. The ethereal leader's telepathic presence immediately established itself throughout the chamber, creating a mental atmosphere of gravitas and ancient authority. "The session will commence with the matter of territorial rights to the Kepler 442 system." His thoughts resonated in the minds of every being present. 3 major claimants have presented their cases for initial review. We will hear first from the Zephyrian Empire, followed by the Brutarian Confederation, and finally from the Terran Federation. The order of presentation was not random. In galactic diplomatic protocol, the sequence indicated perceived importance and likelihood of success. By placing humanity last, the Council was making their expectations clear to everyone present. As the chamber filled to capacity with representatives from across the galaxy, a notable absence was becoming apparent. The human delegation's assigned seating remained empty as the formal session time approached. Murmurs began to ripple through the assembly, with many species interpreting the absence as either cowardice or incompetence. Perhaps they have finally realized the futility of their position. Kethvar commented loudly enough for nearby delegations to hear. It would save everyone considerable time if they simply withdrew their claim now. 5 minutes past the scheduled start time, with Chairman Zaris beginning to show signs of impatience. The chamber's main entrance opened with a soft hiss. Marcus Chen entered alone, carrying nothing but a single data pad and wearing the simple black uniform that marked him as a representative of Earth's diplomatic corps. His footsteps made no sound as he crossed the vast floor of the chamber, and his expression revealed nothing as hundreds of alien eyes tracked his movement. He took his seat at the human delegation table without fanfare, placed his data pad on the surface, and folded his hands. He did not acknowledge the stares, the whispered comments, or the obvious displays of superiority from the other major delegations. He simply waited, his posture relaxed but alert, like a predator conserving energy before a hunt. The contrast between Marcus and the other major delegates was stark and, to many observers, amusing. Where they had arrived with retinues of advisors, displays of technology, and obvious preparations for extended presentations, the humans sat alone with minimal equipment and no apparent strategy beyond attendance. The Zephyrian Empire will present its claim, Chairman Zaris announced, his mental voice carrying a note of anticipation for what promised to be the day's main event. Ambassador Kethvar rose with practiced theatrical flair, his forearms gesturing to activate the holographic displays that immediately filled the space above the central platform. Stars and planets materialized in perfect detail, showing trade routes, resource deposits, and strategic positions that painted a compelling picture of Zephyrian superiority. Honored Chairman, esteemed colleagues, Kethvar began, his voice carrying the polished confidence of someone who had never lost a major diplomatic engagement. The Zephyrian Empire's claim to the Kepler 442 system rests upon 3,000 years of established galactic law, superior technological capability, and the manifest needs of galactic civilization itself. For the next hour, the Zephyrian presentation unfolded with masterful precision. Legal precedents were cited with scholarly accuracy. Technological demonstrations showed capabilities that dwarfed human achievements, and economic models painted a picture of prosperity that would benefit numerous allied species. The display was designed not just to present a case, but to overwhelm any potential opposition with the sheer scope of Zephyrian preparation and capability. Throughout the presentation, Marcus Chen remained motionless at his table, his eyes fixed on the ambassador but his expression revealing nothing. He took no notes, made no recordings, and showed no reaction to even the most pointed criticisms of human technological and diplomatic limitations. To casual observers, he appeared to be either overwhelmed by the complexity of the arguments or simply resigned to inevitable defeat. General Thexmore's presentation followed, and it was a stark contrast to the Zephyrian emphasis on legal precedent and technological superiority. The Brutarian approach focused on strength, military capability, and the harsh realities of galactic politics, where the strong survived and the weak yielded territory to their betters. The Brutarian Confederation has defended its territorial claims for over 5,000 years, Thexmore declared, his massive form dominating the central platform. We do not hide behind legal technicalities or economic theories. Our claim rests upon our ability to defend what we take and hold what we defend. The Kepler 442 system will be protected by Brutarian strength, as all our territories have been protected since before most of these civilizations achieved spaceflight. To emphasize his point, Thexmore activated a holographic display of the Brutarian fleet. Thousands of warships appeared in the air above the platform, their weapon systems clearly visible and their tactical formations suggesting immediate readiness for conflict. The message was unambiguous. Brutarian claims were enforced by military might that few species would dare to challenge. During this presentation, Marcus Chen's behavior shifted slightly. Where he had remained perfectly still during the Zephyrian arguments, now his fingers drummed once, softly, against the surface of his table. It was a tiny gesture that would have been meaningless to most observers, but to someone trained in psychological analysis, it might have indicated calculation rather than nervousness. As Thexmore concluded his presentation with a demonstration of personal combat capability, shattering a block of titanium steel alloy with his bare hands, the chamber erupted in appreciative roars from warrior species throughout the assembly. The general returned to his seat with obvious satisfaction, secure in the knowledge that his display of strength had reinforced brutarian dominance over species that relied on words rather than weapons. "The Terran Federation will now present its claim," Chairman Zaris announced, his mental tone carrying what might have been resignation or curiosity about what form of humiliation humanity would inflict upon itself. Marcus Chen rose from his seat with the same economical movement he had displayed since his arrival. He did not activate any holographic displays. He did not summon legal documents or technological demonstrations. He simply walked to the central platform, his hands empty, his expression neutral. The chamber fell silent, not with anticipation, but with a kind of puzzled expectation. Representatives leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand what the human delegation's strategy could possibly be. Surely they had prepared some kind of presentation, some argument, however weak, some attempt to justify their presence in these proceedings. Marcus reached the center of the platform and stopped. For several seconds he said nothing, his gaze moving slowly across the assembled delegates. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, requiring the chamber's audio systems to amplify his words to reach the outer tiers. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said, as if introducing himself at a casual social gathering rather than addressing the most powerful political assembly in the galaxy. "I represent the interests of humanity in this matter." He paused again, and in that silence, something shifted in the chamber's atmosphere. The casual dismissal and amused anticipation began to transform into uncertainty. There was something in the human's calm demeanor, something in his complete lack of nervousness or preparation, that suggested depths the other delegates had not considered. The Kepler 442 system contains 17 planets, 43 moons, and asteroid fields rich in rare Earth elements. Its position makes it strategically valuable for trade routes between the Orion and Perseus arms of the galaxy. Both previous presentations have made this clear. Marcus's recitation of basic facts seemed anticlimactic after the grand presentations that had preceded him. But his delivery carried an undertone that was difficult to identify. It was not nervousness or uncertainty. If anything, it sounded like someone reciting details about property they already owned. "The Zephyrian Empire bases its claim on legal precedent and technological superiority. The Brutarian Confederation claims the system by right of strength and military capability." Another pause, longer this time, as Marcus seemed to consider something. "Both approaches have merit within their own philosophical frameworks." Ambassador Kethvar shifted in his seat, his compound eyes glittering with satisfaction. The human was conceding the validity of their opponent's arguments. This would be even easier than anticipated. "However," Marcus continued, and something in that single word caused General Thexmore to stop his casual conversation with his lieutenant and focus entirely on the human at the platform's center. "Both presentations have overlooked certain relevant factors." Marcus activated his datapad, but instead of holographic displays filling the air above the platform, the chamber's main screens simply showed a single line of text. "Sol System Defense Grid. Activation status, online." 6 months ago, Marcus said, his voice still quiet but somehow carrying more clearly than the shouted declarations that had preceded him, humanity completed construction of our home system's defensive grid. The project took 15 years and required resources equivalent to the gross domestic product of most mid-level civilizations. A new line appeared on the screens. Kepler 442 Defense Grid. Activation status. Online. 3 months ago, we completed a similar installation in the Kepler 442 system. The silence in the chamber was now complete. Even the ambient sounds of environmental systems seemed muted as hundreds of alien minds processed what they were hearing. The grid consists of 47,000 automated defense platforms, each equipped with quantum disruption weapons capable of disabling any known ship design within a range of 37 light minutes. The platforms are powered by controlled micro-black holes and are capable of independent operation for approximately 200 years without maintenance. Ambassador Kethvar's ceremonial robes rustled as he leaned forward, his forearms beginning to gesture in agitation. This is impossible. Our intelligence networks would have detected such construction. No civilization has the resources to build such an installation without years of preparation that would be obvious to... Your intelligence networks, Marcus interrupted gently, detected exactly what we wanted them to detect. Construction freighters carrying mining equipment and industrial supplies, survey ships conducting routine mapping operations, transport vessels moving personnel and materials for what appeared to be a modest scientific outpost. The screens now showed actual images, vast construction ships that had been disguised as industrial vessels, massive defense platforms that had been assembled in the shadow of asteroid fields, and weapon systems of a design that none of the assembled representatives had ever seen. The grid is currently targeting every ship within the Kepler 442 system that does not carry a Terran Federation identification code. This includes the Zephyrian survey fleet that arrived 2 weeks ago to begin preliminary mining operations, and the Brutarian advance scouts that established their forward base on the system's 4th planet. General Thexmore rose from his seat, his massive form trembling with rage. You dare threaten Brutarian forces? No human technology can match our military might. If you have actually built these defenses, they will be swept away like dust before the full power of our fleets. Marcus turned to face the general directly, and for the first time since entering the chamber, his expression changed. It was not fear or uncertainty that crossed his features. It was the look of a predator that had been offered exactly the challenge it had been hoping for. General Thexmore, Marcus said, and his voice carried a note of what might have been gratitude. I was hoping you would say something like that. The tension in the Grand Council chamber had transformed from casual dismissal to electric anticipation. General Thexmore stood at his full imposing height, his ritual armor gleaming under the chamber's lights as he glared down at the human who had dared to challenge Brutarian military supremacy. Around him, his warrior companions shifted restlessly, hands moving toward weapons in a display of readiness that had never failed to intimidate opposing delegates. Marcus Chen remained at the center of the platform, his posture unchanged, his expression now carrying what observers might mistake for mild curiosity rather than appropriate fear. When he spoke again, his voice maintained the same quiet tone that had characterized his entire presentation, but something in his demeanor suggested that the real proceedings were only now beginning. General, your military record is impressive, Marcus said, consulting his datapad as if reading from a casual reference document. The conquest of the Helix Nebula colonies, the subjugation of the Crystalline Confederacy, the decisive victory at the Battle of Proxima Tertius. 43 major military campaigns, with a perfect record of victory through superior force and strategic intimidation. Thexmore's scarred features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. The human was acknowledging Brutarian superiority, perhaps in preparation for the inevitable surrender that would spare his people unnecessary suffering. At least one species in this chamber understands the realities of galactic politics, he rumbled approvingly. However, Marcus continued, and again, that simple word caused a shift in the chamber's atmosphere. Your record also shows a consistent pattern of behavior that becomes quite predictable once properly analyzed. The human's data pad projected a new display onto the chamber's screens, but instead of weapon specifications or territorial maps, it showed detailed psychological profiles and behavioral analysis charts. The information was so comprehensive and accurate that several Brutarian officers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing private details that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. In each of your major victories, you followed the same strategic template, Marcus explained, his tone remaining conversational despite the increasingly hostile attention focused on him. Initial contact involves displays of personal physical dominance to establish psychological superiority. This is followed by demonstrations of fleet strength to reinforce the implicit threat. Finally, you offer terms that appear generous but are designed to create long-term dependence on Brutarian protection. Ambassador Kethvar watched this exchange with growing unease. The human's casual analysis of Brutarian military doctrine demonstrated a level of intelligence preparation that suggested capabilities far beyond what anyone had expected from Earth's diplomatic corps. His four arms rustled his ceremonial robes as he began to recalculate his assessment of the situation. The pattern is effective, Marcus acknowledged, because most species respond to displays of superior force with logical calculations about survival versus resistance. They choose survival, accept Brutarian terms, and become willing participants in their own subjugation. General Thexmore's amusement was fading, replaced by the cold anger of a predator who sensed that his prey might not be as helpless as initially assumed. You speak of patterns as if they matter. Patterns exist because they work. Superior force creates predictable outcomes regardless of analysis or preparation. True, Marcus agreed, which is why humanity chose a different approach to the problem you represent. The screens changed again, now displaying what appeared to be standard Brutarian fleet formations and tactical deployments. But as the delegates watched, red indicators began appearing throughout the formations, marking specific vessels, weapon systems, and command structures with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of Brutarian military organization. 3 years ago, we began what we called the Reaper Protocol, Marcus explained, his voice taking on the tone of someone describing a mildly interesting academic exercise. The goal was simple: identify every significant threat to human expansion and develop specific countermeasures that would neutralize those threats permanently. Chairman Xeris stirred in his biomechanical chamber, his ancient telepathic consciousness focusing intently on the human representative. In 2 millennia of galactic politics, he had learned to recognize the signs of a fundamental shift in power dynamics. What he was witnessing was not a desperate bluff by a minor species, but the calculated revelation of capabilities that could reshape the galactic balance entirely. The Brutarian Confederation was designated Priority Target Alpha, Marcus continued matter-of-factly. Your military strength, territorial ambitions, and historical aggression patterns made you the most significant obstacle to peaceful human expansion. Therefore, you received our most comprehensive attention. General Thexmore's massive hands clenched into fists, the sound of his knuckles cracking audible throughout the chamber. You dare target the Brutarian Confederation? Our fleets number in the tens of thousands. Our warriors are trained from birth for combat. Our weapons technology has dominated this galaxy for 5,000 years. Yes, Marcus replied simply. We know. The screens now displayed detailed schematics of Brutarian warships, down to internal deck plans and weapon specifications that were classified at the highest levels of their military hierarchy. But more disturbing than the intelligence breach was the overlay of red targeting indicators that marked specific vulnerability points on each ship design. Every Brutarian vessel follows standardized construction protocols that prioritize durability and firepower over adaptability, Marcus explained, pointing to specific sections of the schematics. Your engineers favor redundant systems and massive armor plating, which creates predictable stress patterns and structural weaknesses that can be exploited with precision targeting. The Brutarian delegation was now visibly agitated, with several officers reaching for communication devices to contact their fleets. But Marcus's next words stopped them cold. "Communication with your forces is currently impossible," he said, still maintaining his conversational tone. "Approximately 10 minutes ago, our quantum disruption grid activated a localized interference field that extends throughout this system. No signals can enter or leave the Nexus 7 area of operations until we choose to deactivate the field." Ambassador Kethvar finally found his voice, his forearms gesticulating frantically as he addressed Chairman Zaris. "This is an act of war. The human is describing the implementation of hostile military action against multiple sovereign governments. The Council must respond immediately to this unprecedented aggression." Marcus turned to face the Zephyrian ambassador, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Ambassador Kethvar," he said, "did you really think we would overlook the Zephyrian Empire in our threat assessment?" The chamber's screens shifted to display a new set of schematics, these showing the elegant crystalline designs of Zephyrian technology. But like the Brutarian vessels, these displays were overlaid with targeting data and vulnerability analyses that demonstrated complete understanding of systems that were supposedly beyond human comprehension. The Zephyrian approach to galactic dominance is more sophisticated than Brutarian force projection, Marcus acknowledged. Economic manipulation, technological dependency, legal frameworks designed to legitimize territorial acquisition through bureaucratic complexity. It's actually quite elegant. Kethvar's compound eyes darkened with growing fear as he began to understand that humanity's intelligence capabilities were far beyond anything he had imagined possible. "How could you possibly have obtained such classified information? Our security protocols are impenetrable to species of your technological level." "Ambassador," Marcus replied gently, "you're still thinking in terms of your previous assumptions about human capabilities. Let me offer you a different perspective." The screens now showed a real-time display of Zephyrian space, with dozens of fleet positions and industrial installations marked with the same red targeting indicators that had appeared on the Brutarian schematics. But more shocking than the intelligence breach was the presence of unknown contacts moving through Zephyrian territory with apparent impunity. For the past 18 months, human stealth vessels have been conducting comprehensive surveillance of both Zephyrian and Brutarian space. We've mapped your installations, analyzed your defenses, and identified critical vulnerabilities in your infrastructure that could be exploited to achieve strategic objectives with minimal resource expenditure. General Thexmore's rage finally overcame his tactical restraint. "Enough of this madness! If you possess such capabilities, why haven't you used them? Why reveal your intelligence to us here instead of simply taking what you want through force?" Marcus nodded approvingly, as if the general had asked exactly the right question. "Because, General, humanity learned something important from studying your approach to conflict resolution. Superior force creates temporary compliance, but it doesn't create lasting stability. Fear-based relationships require constant reinforcement and inevitable escalation." The human moved to a different position on the platform, his movements still casual, but somehow more purposeful. "We decided to try a different approach. Instead of using our capabilities to destroy potential threats, we would use them to transform potential enemies into willing allies." The screens changed once more, now showing not weapon systems or targeting data, but detailed economic models and development projections. The displays illustrated how human technology could enhance both Zephyrian and Brutarian capabilities while creating mutual dependencies that made conflict counterproductive for all parties. The Reaper Protocol was never designed to harvest lives, Marcus explained, his voice taking on a quality that suggested deeper meaning behind his words. It was designed to harvest the seeds of cooperation from the soil of potential conflict. Chairman Zaris extended his telepathic consciousness throughout the chamber, sampling the mental states of the assembled delegates. What he found confirmed his growing suspicion that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A minor species that had achieved strategic superiority not through superior force or economic dominance, but through comprehensive understanding of their opponents, combined with the restraint to use that knowledge for diplomatic rather than military objectives. However, Marcus continued, and once again that single word caused a ripple of tension throughout the chamber. The protocol includes contingencies for situations where cooperation cannot be achieved through peaceful means. The screens returned to the targeting displays, but now they showed real-time positions of Brutarian and Zephyrian forces throughout the galaxy. Red indicators marked not just ships and installations, but supply lines, command centers, and critical infrastructure points that, if simultaneously disrupted, would cripple both civilizations' ability to project force beyond their home systems. Every major Brutarian fleet is currently within range of human quantum disruption weapons, Marcus stated matter-of-factly. Every critical Zephyrian industrial complex is targeted by stealth vessels carrying antimatter charges sufficient to achieve complete structural collapse. Every supply depot, communication relay, and command facility that supports your territorial claims has been identified and prepared for immediate neutralization. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause as hundreds of alien minds struggled to process the implications of what they were hearing. But here's what makes humanity different from every other species you've encountered, Marcus said, his quiet voice somehow carrying more menace than any shouted threat could have conveyed. We don't want to use these capabilities. We built them not because we enjoy destruction, but because we understand that sometimes the most effective way to prevent a war is to demonstrate the ability to win one decisively. General Thexamore sank slowly back into his seat, his massive form suddenly seeming smaller as he comprehended the scope of the trap that had been constructed around his entire civilization. Ambassador Kethavar's forearms trembled as he realized that every legal precedent and economic advantage the Zephyrian Empire possessed meant nothing if their industrial capacity could be eliminated with precision strikes against which they had no defense. Marcus Chen stood at the center of the platform, no longer appearing to be a minor diplomatic representing an insignificant species. The transformation was subtle but complete. Where before he had seemed unremarkable and out of place among galactic powers, now he radiated the quiet confidence of someone who held the power of life and death over entire civilizations and had chosen, for the moment, to stay his hand. So, he said, his tone returning to the conversational level with which he had begun his presentation, shall we discuss terms for peaceful cooperation in the development of the Kepler 442 system, or would you prefer to test whether human restraint has limits? The Grand Council chamber had transformed from a venue for diplomatic theater into something resembling a surgical theater, with Marcus Chen as the surgeon and two of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations as his patients. The silence that followed his final question stretched for nearly a full minute, broken only by the barely audible hum of life support systems and the soft clicking of Zephyrian mandibles as Ambassador Kethavar struggled to process the complete reversal of his carefully planned victory. Chairman Zaris was the first to speak, his ancient telepathic voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration. In 2,000 years of galactic politics, I have never witnessed such a comprehensive demonstration of strategic preparation. The Terran Federation has clearly invested considerable resources in understanding the nature of galactic power dynamics. Marcus inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, but said nothing, allowing the weight of revealed capabilities to settle fully in the minds of his audience. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species leaned forward in their seats, eager to witness how the galaxy's established powers would respond to having their fundamental assumptions about human capabilities so thoroughly dismantled. General Thexmore was struggling visibly with the cognitive dissonance between his lifetime of military supremacy and the sudden discovery that his entire civilization was at the mercy of a species he had dismissed as inconsequential. His massive hands opened and closed repeatedly, a nervous gesture that would have been unthinkable hours earlier when he had dominated the chamber through sheer physical presence. "This changes nothing," he finally growled, though his voice lacked the confident certainty that had characterized his earlier statements. "If you possess such capabilities, using them would make you the aggressors. The entire galaxy would unite against human expansion once they understood the threat you represent." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the general's point for the first time. "An interesting perspective, General. Let me share some additional information that might influence your analysis." The chamber's screens activated once more, but instead of targeting data or weapon schematics, they displayed a map of known galactic space with dozens of star systems highlighted in blue. The pattern was immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with galactic politics. The highlighted systems represented the territories of smaller civilizations that had been absorbed, conquered, or otherwise dominated by major powers over the past millennium. The Reaper Protocol included extensive analysis of historical expansion patterns, Marcus explained, his voice maintaining its conversational tone despite the profound implications of what he was revealing. "We discovered that over the past 1,000 years, 47 minor civilizations have been eliminated through various forms of peaceful assimilation or military conquest. The Brutarian Confederation accounts for 19 of these eliminations. The Zephyrian Empire is responsible for 23. Ambassador Kethvar's four arms began gesticulating frantically. "Those were legitimate territorial acquisitions conducted within established galactic law. The civilizations in question were offered generous terms for voluntary integration into systems designed to gradually eliminate their independence and cultural identity." Marcus interrupted gently. "Yes, we studied your methods extensively. Very efficient. The subject populations rarely realize they're being systematically absorbed until the process is nearly complete." The screens now showed detailed timelines of these absorption processes, with data so comprehensive that several minor species representatives in the chamber gasped in recognition as they saw their own civilizations' experiences mapped with clinical precision. The pattern was clear and damning. Both major powers had perfected techniques for eliminating potential rivals through methods that appeared legal and voluntary, but were actually forms of sophisticated cultural genocide. "The interesting discovery," Marcus continued, "was that both the Brutarian and Zephyrian methods rely on the same fundamental assumption, that minor species lack the capability to resist or retaliate effectively. Your expansion strategies are based on the certainty that your victims cannot threaten your home territories or core interests." General Thexmore leaned forward, his scarred features twisting with confusion. "Because it is true. No minor species has ever possessed the resources or technology to challenge established galactic powers. The natural order of civilizations ensures that strength determines survival." "General," Marcus said, and his smile returned with an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You're still thinking in terms of conventional power projection. Let me show you what unconventional warfare looks like when conducted by a species that has studied your methods and decided to improve upon them. The displays changed to show real-time intelligence feeds from both Brutarian and Zephyrian space. But instead of military installations or fleet positions, the screens now showed civilian infrastructure, power generation facilities, atmospheric processors, food production centers, and the countless installations that supported daily life for billions of beings across both empires. Traditional military doctrine focuses on destroying an enemy's ability to fight, Marcus explained. But human strategic analysis identified a more efficient approach. Instead of targeting military assets that can be replaced or reinforced, we identified the civilian infrastructure that, if disrupted, would create cascading system failures throughout your entire civilizations. The screen zoomed in on specific installations, showing details that demonstrated complete understanding of how each facility operated and how its failure would affect larger systems. Power grids that supplied entire star systems, food processing centers that fed hundreds of worlds, atmospheric generation facilities that maintained breathable environments for species that had long ago lost the ability to survive without technological support. A single coordinated strike against 47 specific targets would eliminate the Brutarian Confederation's ability to maintain life support systems for approximately 60% of your population, Marcus stated, with the same tone he might use to discuss weather patterns. Similar strikes against 39 Zephyrian installations would create food distribution failures that would result in widespread starvation within 6 months. The horror of what he was describing began to register throughout the chamber. This was not military conquest or territorial acquisition. This was the calculated description of genocide conducted through infrastructure warfare that would appear to be natural system failures rather than deliberate attacks. Ambassador Kethvar rose from his seat, his ceremonial robes rustling with agitation. You cannot be serious. No civilized species would contemplate such wholesale destruction of civilian populations. The galactic community would never tolerate such violations of the basic principles of warfare. Marcus turned to face the Zephyrian directly, and his expression carried a coldness that had been absent during his earlier presentations. Ambassador, are you familiar with the Helix Nebula colonies that General Thexmore mentioned in his military record? Kethvar's compound eyes darted nervously between Marcus and the Brutarian general. I am aware of the historical references, yes. The Helix colonies were home to approximately 4 million beings from a species called the Melodians, Marcus continued. They were a peaceful civilization that had achieved a remarkable synthesis of artistic expression and scientific advancement. Their music was considered among the most beautiful in the galaxy, and their mathematical discoveries had practical applications that could have benefited every species in known space. The screens now showed archived footage of the Helix Nebula colonies before their conquest, displaying crystalline cities that seemed to grow from the planet's surfaces like living art, and beings whose natural bioluminescence created patterns that were simultaneously communication and aesthetic expression. The Brutarian conquest was swift and efficient, Marcus continued. The Melodians offered no military resistance, hoping that their value as artists and scientists would lead to peaceful coexistence. Instead, they were classified as a non-productive species and systematically relocated to resource extraction facilities where their unique physiologies made them ideal for mining operations in environments toxic to most other species. General Thexmore shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The chamber had grown absolutely silent as representatives realized they were witnessing an accounting that many had hoped would never come. The last Melodian died in a Brutarian mining facility approximately 200 years ago, Marcus stated. Their music is gone forever. Their mathematical discoveries were classified as military secrets and have never been shared with the galactic community. An entire civilization was erased so thoroughly that most species have forgotten they ever existed. The screens changed to show similar documentation of the civilizations that had been absorbed by the Zephyrian Empire, each one a unique culture that had been gradually dismantled through economic manipulation and legal frameworks that made resistance impossible. Gardens of living crystal that had been converted to industrial facilities. Poetry that existed in mathematical equations that had been classified and locked away. Art forms that required specific atmospheric conditions that had been altered to accommodate more economically valuable species. Both of your civilizations have perfected the art of making entire cultures disappear while maintaining the appearance of legal and civilized behavior, Marcus continued. You've convinced yourselves that might makes right, and that superior force justifies any action taken to maintain your dominance. Chairman Xeris stirred in his biomechanical chamber, his telepathic presence radiating a mixture of ancient sadness and growing understanding. And now you propose to apply the same logic to our civilizations that we have applied to others. No, Marcus replied, and for the first time since beginning his presentation, his voice carried genuine emotion. That's exactly what we refuse to do. The screens changed once more, now showing not targeting data or vulnerability analyses, but detailed reconstruction plans. Cities could be rebuilt, populations could be relocated and supported, entire civilizations could be restored and given the resources to flourish independently. The plans were comprehensive and clearly represented years of preparation and massive resource allocation. The Reaper Protocol was never designed to harvest civilizations, Marcus explained, his voice carrying a weight of conviction that made clear this was the core of humanity's strategic philosophy. It was designed to give us the capability to offer a choice to species that had never before been presented with real alternatives. He walked to a different position on the platform, his movement casual but somehow more authoritative. Both the Brutarian Confederation and the Zephyrian Empire can continue to exist and prosper. Your populations will be safe, your cultures will be preserved, and your legitimate territorial claims will be respected. But your expansion through conquest and absorption will end. Today, General Thexmore found his voice, though it carried none of its earlier confidence. And if we refuse these terms? If we choose to test whether human restraint truly has limits? Marcus's smile returned, but now it carried the genuine warmth of someone who hoped never to be forced into demonstrating the extent of his capabilities. Then, General, you will discover why we chose the designation Reaper for this protocol. Not because we enjoy harvesting lives, but because we understand that sometimes the only way to plant the seeds of a better future is to clear away the weeds that would choke out new growth. The chamber remained silent as the implications settled fully. Both major powers had been offered a choice between voluntary cooperation and involuntary neutralization. The terms were non-negotiable. The capabilities to enforce them had been demonstrated beyond question, and the human representative had made it clear that the decision belonged entirely to them. Ambassador Kethvar was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. What specifically do you propose? Marcus activated his datapad one final time, and the chamber's screens displayed a comprehensive treaty framework that was clearly the product of extensive preparation and deep understanding of galactic politics. Joint development of the Kepler 442 system under human administrative oversight with equal profit sharing among all three parties. Immediate cessation of expansion activities against minor civilizations, with existing absorbed populations given the choice of independence or continued integration under revised terms that preserve cultural autonomy. Establishment of a galactic monitoring system to prevent future conflicts through early intervention rather than military response. The terms were generous enough to preserve the dignity and prosperity of both major powers while completely restructuring the galactic balance to favor cooperation over conquest. More importantly, they represented a framework that could be extended to resolve similar conflicts throughout known space without requiring the kind of overwhelming force projection that humanity had revealed itself capable of deploying. General Thexmore studied the terms with the eye of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating the costs and benefits of military action. What he saw was a framework that would preserve brutarian strength while channeling it toward productive rather than destructive purposes. These terms would require significant changes to our traditional approach to territorial acquisition. Yes, Marcus agreed, but they would also guarantee the long-term survival and prosperity of your civilization. The alternative is testing whether human weapons work as advertised. Chairman Xeris extended his telepathic consciousness throughout the chamber, sampling the mental states of delegates who were witnessing the birth of a new galactic order. The Terran Federation has demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally alter the balance of galactic power. Their proposal offers stability through cooperation rather than domination through force. I believe we must give serious consideration to these terms. Ambassador Kethvar looked around the chamber, noting the expressions of delegates from dozens of minor species who were clearly hoping that this moment would mark the end of their centuries-long fear of absorption by major powers. The Zephyrian Empire accepts the proposed framework for joint development and requests detailed negotiations regarding implementation timelines. General Thexmore was silent for several long moments, his massive form motionless, as he calculated probabilities and alternatives. Finally, he spoke with the voice of someone who had recognized that even the strongest predator must sometimes acknowledge a superior hunter. The Brutarian Confederation agrees to participate in negotiations regarding the proposed framework. Marcus Chen nodded once, his expression returning to the neutral professionalism with which he had entered the chamber hours earlier. But now, instead of appearing unremarkable among galactic powers, he stood as the representative of a species that had achieved something unprecedented, the ability to enforce peace, not through superior violence, but through superior preparation combined with the wisdom to use overwhelming capability as a foundation for negotiation rather than conquest. "Excellent," he said, his voice returning to its conversational tone. "I believe we can create something better than what has existed before, not through the dominance of the strong over the weak, but through the recognition that true strength lies in lifting others up, rather than keeping them down." As the formal session concluded and delegates began the complex process of restructuring their fundamental assumptions about galactic politics, Marcus Chen gathered his simple datapad and prepared to leave the platform. The silent human who had entered the chamber as a perceived inconsequence was departing as the architect of a new galactic order, having demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses not to hunt. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in millennia, that change promised to favor the growth of civilization rather than its endless cycle of conquest and absorption. The Reaper had harvested not lives, but the possibility of a future where strength served wisdom, rather than the other way around.